Winter wind swept across Denver's city park, rattling bare trees and frozen benches. In the quiet snow sat 2-year-old Martha Collins in her wheelchair, feeding birds beside her small therapy dog, Daisy. Peaceful, until 3 bikers in leather jackets roared in like a storm. They mocked her, kicked the dog, and forced her to watch, while people nearby looked away. Then, a man in a faded green coat appeared. Ethan Walker, 42, a veteran, walked calmly across the snow, his German Shepherd by his side like a silent guardian. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply stepped between cruelty and a woman who had no one else to stand for her. What happened next didn't just stop 3 bikers. It changed how the whole town understood strength, loyalty, and who real protectors are. Before we begin, where are you watching from? And have you ever seen courage appear exactly when it was needed? Snow whispered gently across City Park in Denver, Colorado, coating frozen benches and leafless oaks in a pale shimmer, the kind that made silence feel sacred. In the middle of a narrow pathway sat an elderly woman in a wheelchair, wrapped in a faded wool coat and a hand-knitted scarf, her fingers hidden beneath soft brown gloves. Her name was Martha Collins, 72 years old, once a schoolteacher with a voice warm enough to calm storms inside troubled children. Though time had curled her spine and stiffened her joints, it had not dimmed the quiet dignity in her pale blue eyes. Her hair, silver and wispy, was tucked loosely into a bun, and her face, lined but still tender, carried the memory of laughter even when she wasn't smiling. Beside her sat Daisy, a small golden therapy dog of 6, with velvety amber fur and soulful brown eyes that always seemed to ask permission before moving. Daisy had that rare kind of gentleness that felt like a whispered promise. You're not alone. She was trained not just to assist, but to listen to loneliness, to pain, to the kind of silence people carry when they don't know how to ask for help. Martha leaned down, her voice soft and playful. You're not just a therapy dog, you know. You're Dr. Daisy, specialist in sadness, loneliness, and winter blues. Daisy's tail thumped twice in approval. Martha scattered breadcrumbs onto the snow, watching sparrows hop closer, their tiny feet stamping delicate prints into the white surface. For a moment, the old woman forgot how cold it was and how sharply her memories sometimes hurt. She remembered dancing barefoot at her wedding under string lights, her late husband's laughter echoing through a summer evening. She remembered how he used to say that love wasn't loud, it was consistent, steady, like breath in the morning or tea on the stove. These memories did not make her cry, they made her full. The peace fractured. Engines growled like beasts as 3 motorcycles entered the park, their rumble too loud for the soft winter morning. The bikers dismounted in a plume of exhaust and snow dust. Their boots hit the icy path with a thud that echoed more harshly than any word could. They didn't walk, they occupied space. The leader was Rex, tall and heavily built, his leather jacket stretched tight across tattooed arms. His beard was thick, unruly, with streaks of gray, and his eyes held the look of someone who had long ago decided that being feared was easier than being understood. Duke walked beside him, slightly younger, his buzz-cut hair emphasizing sharp cheekbones and a jaw constantly clenched. His gray eyes were cold, like winter without the beauty, just the chill. Hammer, the third, was lanky, restless, fingers twitching in his pockets. He laughed too quickly, too loudly, like someone afraid of silence. At first, they only looked, then they laughed. Look at the little queen and her royal mutt, Rex said, flicking ash into the wreck. Snow. Duke kicked a chunk of ice toward Daisy. Hammer smirked. Bet the dog's got more life than she does. Martha kept her voice steady, though her palms dampened inside her gloves. Please, she's a therapy dog. She's working. She won't hurt you. Daisy didn't bark. She simply rose, gently placing herself between Martha's wheelchair and the men. A small, trembling shield, but a shield nonetheless. That simple act, the bravery of a little dog, seemed to irritate them more than any words could have. Rex stepped closer, his boots scraping the ice. Therapy? For what loneliness, or reality? He nudged Daisy with his boot, not hard, but not kind. Duke circled around the wheelchair, tapping the wheel with his toe. Hammer snorted. Maybe she got tired of standing up for herself, so now she just rolls away. Martha looked at Daisy. Daisy looked at her. In that look lived fear, faith, loyalty, and something very old, the instinct to protect what cannot protect itself. She felt humiliation not because she was in a wheelchair, but because cruelty had found her here, in a place she thought was safe. Somewhere deep inside her, beneath the scars and surgeries and quiet bloom of old age, a thought whispered, "I am not as helpless as they think, but I am not strong enough to stop them." Rex leaned closer, his breath heavy with stale whiskey and bitterness. "The funny thing about people," he murmured, "is they always think someone's coming to save them." Martha didn't look at him. She looked past him, at the sparrows, at Daisy, at the snow quietly falling as if nothing cruel had ever happened here. And though she didn't understand why, she whispered not to them, but to the air, to winter, to something unnamed, "Not always. But sometimes, someone does." And beyond the line of oak trees, someone had already heard. The wind stiffened as it swept across the frozen pond, stirring up thin flurries of powdered snow that danced briefly in the pale Denver light before settling once more into silence. On the far edge of City Park, where lampposts stood glazed in ice and benches looked like forgotten monuments, a man walked with slow, deliberate steps. His name was Ethan Walker, 42 years old, tall and angular, with the build of someone who had carried heavy things, most of them unseen. His olive-green coat, frayed at the cuffs and scorched faintly near the sleeve, looked like it had lived through more winters than he had. Dark brown hair cropped short, stubble shading his jaw, and a single pale scar over his eyebrow suggested a man shaped equally by discipline and damage. His gray eyes held something quiet, something weary, like a sky that had survived a storm but still remembered every second of it. Beside him walked Ranger, a German shepherd of 4 years, with sable and tan fur thick as winter itself. Ranger didn't trot or wander. He glided, purposeful, alert, a silent guardian matching Ethan's stride with fluid grace. His intelligent amber eyes flicked between his surroundings, snow, distant silhouettes, always calculating. To ordinary people, Ranger was simply a dog trained for obedience. To Ethan, he was a medic against nightmares, a living promise that some things, loyalty, trust, presence, do not require words. Ethan wasn't thinking of war this morning. He was thinking of coffee, maybe warmth, maybe how Ranger would need new boots before the ice sliced his paws. But then, like a splinter under the skin of silence, came a sharp cry. Not a bark, more like a whimper, and with it, a voice, a woman's voice, older, shaking. Ethan stopped mid-step. The world did that thing it sometimes does for people who have lived between chaos and control. It narrowed. Ranger's ears shot upward, his mouth tightening into a line. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't question. He simply moved. He crossed the snowy lawn silently, not running, but cutting through it with the precision of someone who had moved through worse terrain under heavier threats. Ranger followed, not barking, not racing, but matching Ethan's speed exactly. Ethan didn't need to call him. Ranger already knew something was wrong. When they neared the pathway, the scene unfolded with cruel clarity. A wheelchair overturned slightly in the snow, an elderly woman bracing herself with trembling arms, and 3 men, leather jackets, heavy boots, aggression simmering beneath grins that weren't born of humor but of something uglier. Daisy, the tiny therapy dog, lay curled defensively, her little amber body shuddering from cold and fear. Ethan didn't shout. He didn't warn. He merely stepped into their line of sight. Rex, broad and bearded, turned first. His laugh was rough, mocking. "What's this, Captain America and his wolf?" Ethan moved before the echo of those words could fade. No wasted motion. No anger, just precision. A shift of stance, a firm grip, and Rex found himself breathless on the ground, snow imprinting across his jacket. Duke swung toward Ethan, but momentum betrayed him, and within a blink, he too lay stunned, his cheek pressed to the ice, confused how he got there. Hammer started to move toward Daisy, until Ranger stepped forward. He didn't bark, he didn't lunge, he simply stared low, steady, primal. A sound rumbled deep in his throat, Not a growl of rage, but one of warning, a sound older than language. Hammer stepped back. The park fell completely silent. Even the winter wind paused. Rex, still in the snow, stared up at Ethan with something awfully close to fear. Not because he'd been physically overpowered, but because of the quiet. Ethan's calmness was not ordinary. It was the kind that belonged to someone who fought battles far away from witnesses, whose decisions once meant life or death. And that kind of quiet unsettles loud men. They didn't apologize. They didn't speak. They simply scrambled back to their bikes, engines erupting in frustrated growls. They left angry, but they left. Only when the rumbling faded did Ethan kneel. He didn't look at the men riding away. He looked at Daisy. "Easy," he murmured, checking her pause, her spine, her breathing. Daisy trembled, but she didn't flinch from him. She looked at Ranger, who lowered his head gently, letting her rest her muzzle against his shoulder, a small, fragile moment of canine comfort. Then Ethan looked at Martha, not with pity, with respect. She looked shaken but not shattered. Her pale blue eyes, tired but stubborn, met his. You knew what to do," she whispered. Ethan nodded once. Sometimes the body remembers before the mind decides. Ranger sat at his heel. Daisy leaned lightly against Martha's boot. Snow started to fall again, soft, slow, almost gentle, like the world itself exhaled. The cold didn't feel bitter anymore. The park didn't feel empty. Someone had arrived, and he had decided to stay. The light faded early that afternoon. The kind of early that only winter understands, when the sky dims before the world is ready for darkness. Ethan walked beside the wheelchair, pushing it gently through the cleared pathway, Ranger trotting faithfully at his side, while Daisy, bandaged and trembling but brave, lay wrapped in Martha's lap beneath a soft plaid blanket. Martha Collins, despite her shaken posture, still had a spark of humor in her voice, though it flickered like an old candle fighting the wind. The faint bruise on her cheek contrasted softly with her pale skin, and although her scarf covered most of her frail neck, Ethan could see her hand shake slightly when she stroked Daisy's head. "Well," she said, her voice brittle yet playful, "are you an angel, or just snow with legs?" Ethan gave a brief smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes but softened the lines around them, and Ranger's tail moved once, then twice, as if joining in on the joke. The moment felt fragile, like thin ice that could crack beneath too much weight. But still, it was something warm. They reached Martha's apartment, a ground-floor unit in an aging red-brick building that smelled faintly of pine and old books. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs. A younger Martha holding a paintbrush, a husband with gentle eyes and tired hands, 2 children, then grandchildren, all smiling, all gone to places she could no longer follow. A wooden shelf held faded recipe books, pill bottles, and letters tied with ribbon. The apartment felt lived in, but lonely, like a room waiting for footsteps. Ethan helped her settle in, kneeling to adjust the blanket around Daisy. Ranger lay near the door, watching, protective but calm. In the late afternoon, they took Daisy to a small veterinary clinic 2 blocks away, run by Dr. Emily Carter, a kind-hearted woman in her mid-40s with short auburn hair pinned behind her ears, green eyes, and a soft, reassuring voice. She moved with a calm confidence, her hands steady as she examined Daisy, speaking gently to both the dog and Martha as if they were equally fragile. 2 bruised ribs, she murmured, pointing gently at the X-ray. "Nothing broken, just sore, pain medication, warmth and rest. She's tougher than she looks." Daisy thumped her tail once, bravely. Martha smiled, but her eyes were glassy and distant, like someone trying to stay inside themselves. They returned home just as the sky faded into deep lilac, and the chill sharpened. Martha, despite exhaustion, insisted on reporting the incident to the police. Ethan did not argue. He simply stood beside her, silent but solid. The precinct was fluorescent lit and cold, not in temperature, but in spirit. Behind a desk sat Officer Bradley Miller, a heavy-set man in his 50s, with thinning sandy hair and glasses that perpetually slid down his nose. His expression was not cruel, just tired, worn by years of paperwork, petty disputes, and the slow erosion of empathy. He listened impatiently, typing slowly with stiff fingers as Martha described the attack, her voice shaking but firm. Then he leaned back, exhaled, and with a tone too casual for the bruises on her arms and the fear in her eyes, said, "Probably just drunk mischief. You sure you didn't provoke them? Dogs can be unpredictable." The words stung sharper than cold wind. Ethan's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. Martha's eyes, which had faced bikers, surgeries, and the slow loneliness of aging, dimmed with something deeper, not fear, but disbelief. She left with a paper form, but no certainty, no help. Night came quietly. The world outside Martha's window faded into soft indigo, street lamps casting lonely halos on the snow. Daisy slept near the heater, wrapped in a knitted blanket. Ranger lay silently by the door, ears twitching at every distant sound. Martha sat in her living room, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her, not speaking, only thinking. Not about pain, not about fear, about powerlessness. The kind armies and doctors and police do not understand. The kind that sits quietly beside the lonely and the old. At 8:42 p.m., the phone rang. The voice on the other end called himself Mark Thompson. Polite, too polite, with a voice like sugar in cold water sweet, but false. He claimed to be a representative of the establishment where those young men sometimes gather. He apologized formally, offered to cover Daisy's medical bills as an act of goodwill. Then his tone changed. Smooth became sharp. Sweet became steel. "We don't want this to become noisy. You're a reasonable woman. It would be unfortunate for anyone to feel the need to visit. Elderly people should feel safe at home." The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. When the call ended, Martha didn't cry. She simply stared at the phone, as if it had spoken a language only she could hear. She understood now. This wasn't about bruises or barking. This was about silence. Her silence. She stared at the kitchen counter, where a small folded scrap of paper lay beside her teacup, Ethan Walker, a number, and beneath it, written in small, decisive handwriting, "If they come back, call me." She didn't hesitate now. She picked up the phone not because she was scared, but because she had been silent long enough. Snow fell heavier that evening, the kind that didn't drift softly but arrived with purpose, thick and silent, layering rooftops like folded white blankets. It was the kind of night when footsteps disappeared quickly, and secrets could hide under the hush of winter. Martha's apartment was dark and still, lights turned off, curtains drawn, the air carrying only faint traces of lavender tea, wool blankets, and old memories. A spare wheelchair sat folded near the door, beside a framed photograph of a smiling family now scattered across states and years. The space was quiet, too quiet, and because no one was home, there was no one to hear the soft crack of the rear window latch being forced open. They entered one by one. Rex first, large, square-shouldered, leather jacket zipped tight, a faded scar slicing across one eyebrow, eyes carrying that restless hostility of a man at war with the world, and losing. Duke followed, heavy boots grinding broken glass underfoot, his tattoos crawling up both arms like twisting black vines, his expression cold but uncertain, someone who followed cruelty, but hadn't entirely married it. Hammer came last, tall and lanky with a shaved head and wild eyes that flickered between mockery and unease, fingers twitching like he played with the idea of regret but never held it long enough. None of them spoke much. This wasn't spontaneous. It was planned, orchestrated. And not by them. They moved through the small hallway, breaking things not out of anger, but strategy. A ceramic pot shattered. A framed portrait of Martha and her late husband torn apart. The small drawer of medication emptied, spilled across the rug like bright, helpless confetti. They ripped down the watercolor painting she had made last winter, flowers that never wilted now crushed beneath muddy boots. Duke paused at a framed painting of a greenhouse spring light. Open windows, green leaves glowing like stained glass. "She painted this," he muttered, his voice softer than expected. Rex didn't pause. He didn't look. He simply raised his boot and stomped through the center of the painting. Next came the wall. A clean wall Martha had kept empty, reserved for letters, for photos of family, for dreams she never stopped believing in. Rex took the can of red spray paint from his jacket pocket. The hiss of pressure broke the silence. angry and metallic, slapping red onto white in sharp, violent strokes. Next time, it's the dog. It wasn't graffiti, it was intent. When they left, no laughter followed them, just heavy breaths and darker thoughts, swallowed quickly by falling snow outside. 2 hours later, Martha returned. Daisy had just been discharged from the clinic, her ribs still wrapped, but her tail weakly wagging as if determined not to surrender joy. Martha pushed open the apartment door, expecting warmth and lavender tea. Instead, she found a winter greenhouse destroyed. White curtains ripped from the rods, flower pots overturned like fallen soldiers, photographs torn, faces erased, medicine spilled across the floor like scattered bones. Glass crackled beneath her wheels. The red message glared from the wall like open veins. She didn't scream. Sometimes, grief isn't loud. Sometimes, it's a soundless pull behind your ribs, a breath you forget how to take. She stood still, or rather, sat still. Her hands on the wheels trembled so hard they made tiny squeaking noises on the metal. Daisy, sensing something far worse than physical pain, leaned against her leg, not barking, not whimpering, just being there, as therapy dogs do, not with noise, but with presence. Martha couldn't speak, but she could reach. She dialed Ethan. He didn't answer with a hello. He answered with, "Where are you?" He was there within minutes. He entered quietly, but his face changed when he saw the wall. Something about his posture stiffened, not anger, not shock, but recognition. This wasn't random. This wasn't boys being cruel. This was controlled, calculated, intentional. This was a warning. And warnings had authors. Ethan walked slowly through the remains of the room. Ranger stepping beside him like a silent shadow, head lowered, tail still, hackles slightly raised. Ranger didn't growl. He observed. He remembered. Ethan turned to Martha. "You're not staying here." She didn't argue. That very night, he arranged for a temporary room in a small roadside motel out near the outskirts of the city. A quiet place with pale yellow walls, a humming radiator, and no past for anyone to destroy. He brought Daisy, who curled up at Martha's feet, finding safety, warmth, and something almost like peace. But Ethan didn't stay. Not there. He returned to her apartment and waited. He wasn't a man who chased trouble. He was a man who stood still and let trouble come to him. Outside, snow fell softly. Inside, another kind of storm began to take shape. Denver held its breath that night. The snow was not falling fast, nor swirling dramatically. Instead, it arrived slowly, quietly, like white ash after a long-forgotten fire. Street lamps flickered across the empty sidewalks, casting amber halos onto the frost. Inside the small, wrecked apartment, now stripped of comfort, warmth, and laughter, Ethan waited, lights off. Curtains pinned against drafts. Furniture moved just enough to create shadows but not edges. He didn't speak, didn't pace, didn't frown. He simply listened. Ranger lay like a silent sentinel at his side, alert but still, his breathing controlled and steady, ears locked in perfect radar-like attention. The apartment felt like a trap, not the kind built with violence, but with certainty. He didn't wait for long. At 1:17 a.m., a faint scrape of metal whispered from the back door. Then a muffled laugh, boots on broken ice. The sound of arrogance, returning for what it believed was powerless. 3 shadows pushed through the back entrance, Rex first, Duke behind him. Hammer last, just as before, only colder, more reckless, fueled not by thrill now, but rebellion. They thought the apartment empty. They thought the night still belonged to them. They were wrong. Their cell phone lights sliced through darkness like careless beams, bouncing off broken frames, shattered vases, torn blankets. They didn't realize that their bright little flashlights did not reveal they blinded. They turned them into silhouettes, into targets, a creak, a shift, not fear, precision. Ethan emerged from shadow, not with anger, nor words, but presence. Before Duke could even speak, he felt a grab, firm and unyielding, redirecting his weight, sending him flat against the floor, not a fight, but a controlled landing. Rex turned too fast, swinging wildly. but received only silence in response, silence and an arm around his shoulder, pivoting, directing him safely to the ground with equal brutality and restraint. Hammer froze when he heard Ranger's low rumble, deep and primal. Not rage, but warning. The kind of growl that doesn't threaten, it promises. The fight was short. It lasted not in punches or screeches, but in thudding breaths, scrapes, startled gasps. They were not beaten. They were contained, bound with zip ties. Seated in a row beside the wall, flashlights still glowing at their feet, illuminating defeat in a harsh blue light. They were not in pain, they were in realization. The doorbell rang. Not because of the bikers, but because Ethan had already called. The responding officer was not Miller. It was Detective Elena Ray's late 30s, tall, composed, with a dark wool coat and sharp-lined olive skin. Intelligent brown eyes that saw the scene and understood without needing explanation. She moved with clarity, her presence steady, neither gentle nor harsh, but firm in that way justice should be. She walked through the apartment quietly, examining Daisy's medical bandages, the scars in Martha's floor, the words painted in angry red on the wall. Her jaw tightened. The officers took the men into custody. This time, no paperwork delay, no tired excuses, no careless dismissal. This time, something held. Truth did not whisper, it stood tall. 3 weeks passed. The harshest snow melted first, revealing thin lines of green trying to breathe again. Daisy recovered steadily. Her ribs healed, though she never liked loud footsteps or doors slamming too quickly. Martha found a new place, smaller but brighter, with wide windows facing a courtyard where winter birds hopped across frosted grass like tiny feathered miracles. She started planting small hardy flowers, cold-resistant and slow to die, like her. Ranger stopped at her door sometimes, waiting with the wisdom of a creature who understood things beyond speech. Ethan visited too, not always with words, but with tools. He fixed shelves, reinforced doors, installed a new bell that chimed softly, like tiny wind chimes in spring. He didn't like tea, but he drank it anyway, because Martha smiled when he did. The story, to neighbors, was just a case of some bikers getting arrested. But to Martha, it was something else, something quieter, something warmer. It was the night winter stopped being only about cold and began to be about who stood with you in it. Sometimes, protection doesn't shout. Sometimes, it simply stands at your door and refuses to leave. Sometimes, miracles don't come with golden light, angelic wings, or thunder from the clouds. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, wearing a faded green coat, walking beside a loyal German shepherd, and standing between an old woman in a wheelchair and the harshness of the world. We often believe God's protection is distant, unreachable, something that belongs to ancient stories, but what if it is much closer? What if it appears in a stranger who stops when others look away, in a neighbor who knocks just to make sure you're okay, or in a veteran who has walked through darkness yet still chooses to be a shield for someone else? In everyday life, God's miracles are not always loud. They are kindness, courage, loyalty, protection, and the simple human choice to stand up for what is right. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that light still rises even in the coldest winters, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let it reach someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment. Tell us your thoughts. And if you believe that compassion still exists, that God still works through ordinary people, write Amen below. May God bless you, protect your family, and send you your own miracle, quietly, just when you need it most.